Hello, hello, hello. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Alameda County Budget Training with the Care First Community Coalition. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much for taking time out of a Saturday to be here. We so appreciate coming together and learning about the county, coming together to learn how we can fight for a behavioral health system that really supports all of us, and to be here in relationship with each other. I so appreciate seeing the introductions that have come through the chat so far, and we'll have some more time to get to know each other. But for now, I just want to give some introductions. My name is Joy, and I am with Restore Oakland and the Care First Community Coalition, which is one of 13 organizations that is fighting for behavioral health funding, that's fighting for decarceration of Saturday to jail, et cetera. Just to open up this space today, I'll also introduce Kari, who's on tech, and Mia, who is going to be sharing our screen today. Kari is going to be monitoring the chat. And so as we're going through this presentation, please feel free to put in your questions. We'll have some time to answer them at the end. And also, please feel free to put in your yays, your feelings of confusion, your outrage. This is very much an interactive conversation. And so we want to be able to see that with as we're going. For those of you who need closed captioning, it's at the bottom right-hand corner of your navigation bar at the bottom of the screen. So please feel free to turn that on if you need it. And just as a note, we are recording this training today so that others who were not able to join us today are able to see it, and it will be uploaded onto our website and onto YouTube once we're done. So again, this is a budget training. We're doing this because it's important that we arm ourselves with the necessary tools to understand the budget, to critically engage with it through questions and through advocacy. And also because notoriously Alameda County's budget is really inaccessible and hard to understand. And so this is a way that we're able to share what we know, what we've learned through this year of research and through advocacy, and to bring others into the conversation with us. Can we move forward to the next slide? So the Care First Community Coalition, as I mentioned, is 13 groups of organizations building power together, building relationship and advocating. One of our goals is to decarcerate Santa Rita Jail, which is the 5th largest in the country, and to prevent the future criminalization and incarceration of individuals with behavioral health concerns with wraparound care. And really what that means, right, is full service partnerships, permanent supportive housing, treatment facilities, more money for staffing, things that seem common sense, but if we don't have those things, it creates pitfalls. It creates holes in the system that lead to the criminalization of folks that really are just needing help and care. So we don't want them to be in the jail. We want them to be out in the community receiving services. But also, right, in order to make that happen, we need a budget that allocates money to those services so that they can come into being. So our second goal is to advocate for a county budget that prioritizes and enables our primary goal. We are committed to implementing the Care First policy in a community-centered and racially equitable way. So the Care First Jails Last policy was passed in 2021 through the advocacy of our coalition and writing of our members. And you can learn more about that policy at our website, which can be dropped into the chat. But what that really enables is the county to create a process to evaluate what is not working in the county and allocate resources, allocate policies to make sure that we create a robust care system and stop criminalizing folks, stop incarcerating folks with behavioral health needs at Santa Rita Jail. So our member organizations, All of Us or None, Asian Americans Advancing Justice, the Asian Law Caucus, American Friends Service Committee, Behavioral Health Collaborative of Alameda County, Berkeley Friends, Racial Justice Action Team, Community Health Network, Health Center Network, and the Alameda Health Consortium, Congregation Bethel, East Bay Supportive Housing Collaborative, East Bay Housing Organization, Families Advocating for the Seriously Mentally Ill, Interfaith Coalition for the Justice in Our Jails, National Alliance on Mental Illness in Alameda County, and Restore Oakland. So we have been building power together since 2021 to make sure that we are heard at the county level. Our guiding principles are to center racial equity. We want to make sure that folks that are Black and Brown are at the center of all policies that the county is creating, because we know that they are at most risk and most vulnerable to incarceration. We want to make sure that there is holistic engagement, healing over punishment. So we do not support the use of police. We do not support the use of the criminal justice system as solutions to what is a public health problem. And we want to promote solutions that heal. We are informed by data and by research and want to make sure that our solutions are evidence-based. But above all else, we want to make sure that we are divesting from carceral institutions and that we instead invest in community-based solutions. And as I said, we are in community with 13 organizations, but that doesn't include the full breadth of who we are in community with. We're in community with family members who are concerned about their loved ones. We're in community with organizers, with folks that are formerly incarcerated, with educators, and with our neighbors, right? So we had an info session about a month ago called Justice is Ours to Make, where we asked this question: what are you seeing in your families and your communities as it relates to this conversation of mental health and substance use issues? And we gathered some of their responses to share with you all, both to be able to ground us in what our community is concerned about, but to also make sure that we're not invisibilizing this experience, right? The county and carceral systems rely on us feeling isolated and invisibilized to be able to criminalize folks. And this conversation is one that touches us in so many different ways. And so I would love if folks could take a minute to read some of these bullet points. And if you resonate with any of them that you are concerned about, that you see in your family or your community, to give us a heart in the chat, or even to write out one of the bullets that you resonate with. Yeah, I also want to say here too that the ways that we are, the ways that the county leads to criminalization of folks with behavioral health needs or concerns is by not having adequate resources placed into the behavioral health side. And so that looks all the way from prevention, all the way from early intervention, to when people are in crisis. We see the breadth of folks along that spectrum. And so we really just want to take some time to honor that and also to heal together. Because if we're not healing together, it's really hard to push forward for what we need. Thank you all. Mia, can you move us forward? Thank you. So just to present us to in the priorities of the Care First Community Coalition for this budget cycle. The first is to divest $80 million from Santa Rita's jail's proposed expansion. This expansion is supposedly supposed to bring a unit to house behavioral health staff to provide care and services to folks that are incarcerated there. But we know that $80 million is a lot of money, and the $27 million that the county has to spend first in order to get the money from the state can be better used in the community. And so we want a complete halt of that $80 million, but also a reinvestment of the money that would be used to build it into building a facility in the community. We want to invest $171 million in house keys, not handcuffs. This would look like permanent supportive housing opportunities and full service partnerships for folks that are in the community. And we talk more about that $101 million in our budget platform. We want jail diversion now. We know that it is unconscionable that because of a lack of care and a lack of diversion opportunities for folks with behavioral health needs when they are arrested or when they are booked. We know that that enables the incarceration of folks in Santa Rita jails, whether they are in that population or not. Over 90% of people that are incarcerated in Santa Rita jail are there pretrial. This is outrageous. And so we are advocating for and demanding that there are more diversion options at the point of arrest and at booking to make sure that folks that need help are not trapped in the jail, but rather are diverted into treatment. We are also demanding that we're gathering data to measure the unmet needs and the service gaps of the county. This is really important because if we don't know how effective our programs are, it's really hard to justify the increases in fundings or the decreases in fundings that folks are having. Also, it's really hard to identify if money is being spent wisely. And so we really need that data to be able to make informed decisions. And we want to democratize the budget process and make it more transparent. The only time in the year that we have to talk about the budget, to engage in the budget, is in June. This should be a year-long process and also include more community voice. And so we're advocating for democratizing the budget process and doing more of what we're doing now. So this is the point in the program where we want to be in conversation with you all. This work doesn't happen without relationships. And this work doesn't happen without us understanding where we're coming from, what's bringing us here. And so I know that the slide says 10 minutes, but we're actually going to do 7. We're going to be in a couple of small groups answering these 2 questions: what brings you here? And also asking you to share some story. When you bring your community to mind, your family, your neighborhood, the people where you live and work and love with, what are the stories, questions, or fear that your community holds around the idea of mental illness or substance use disorders? So when you get into your small groups, get comfortable with each other, but also try as much as possible to be open and vulnerable when sharing these questions with each other. See you soon. I'm hoping that that was a good breakout session for folks. I'm seeing some smiles as folks are coming back into the room, which is always a good thing. And I'm always curious about, what are the things that folks are seeing? What are the similarities in our stories? And just to take some time to give some folks some time to reflect. Into the chat, if you could put a word or a phrase or an emoji of how you're coming back from that conversation, some of the things that you talked about, take a couple seconds to write it in. And on my mark, I'm going to count down from 5. We're going to do a little chat waterfall, and then all the responses will come in at once so we can see them. Take a couple seconds. Okay, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Thanks, folks. Take some time to read some of the things that other folks are seeing as well. We're going to keep moving forward with this training, but I so appreciate just the time to connect with you all in this way. So I'm seeing a lot of appreciation and also questions of like, what's going on here? So we're going to talk about it. One of the ways that we advocate is through looking at, reviewing, critiquing the budget, and pushing for what it is that we see could be better, what could be improved. And so to be able to do that, we need to understand what is a budget in the first place. So I have a personal budget that helps keep me accountable to some of my priorities, like saving for emergencies or paying my bills. Very similar to like personal budgets, a government budget does the same thing. It outlines how much income and spending a government is anticipating in a given year, and also helps to determine how its priorities. So how much each department is allocated in order to operate and provide services to the residents of the county. So it's both a guide And it's a process. Throughout the year, there are a couple of different spots when county departments are pitching what it is that they need to operate in that year. There are spaces where the county administrator is providing updates about the federal and the state budgets in order to influence the county budget. And there are spaces for public participation as well. So this is a photo of the budget from last year. You can find this budget and all of the other budget documents at the website down below. Thank you. So the budget is a moral document. It provides a roadmap for what the county's priorities are. The Board of Supervisors lays them out, as well as departments through their pitching and through public advocacy. However, right, if it's not in the budget, it's not getting funded. So when you're reading the budget, you're seeing what the county is prioritizing in terms of what policies it's moving forward to make sure that folks are cared for. And it also means that there are services and resources that we're able to access. But when we advocate for certain policy changes, right, those things come into being through the allocations of dollars in the budget. So we need to make sure that policies like the Care First, Jails Last policy are allocated for properly. We need to make sure that decarceration is allocated properly. And right, that we're not seeing the allocation of things that are antithetical to those stated goals. So it's a moral document, and it's important to be able to understand what's going on.
Awesome. Thank you, Joy. My name is Tash, and I work with Joy and Kari at Restore Oakland, and I'm also part of the Care First Community Coalition. And I'm going to talk a bit about what the problem is in Alameda County. And, you know, as residents, we all know that our folks of color and communities of color are facing an incredibly hard time, especially in this moment of an economic downturn, and especially after decades, if not centuries, of systemic underinvestment of housing and mental health care that is coupled with ongoing and, in fact, increased policing and incarceration. And this is really the intersections in which we are organizing at the Care First Community Coalition. And so we're going to do some work to paint kind of a high level sense of scale and picture as to what the crisis looks like and how the county is administering violence and adding to the problem. Awesome. Sorry, I'm recording and I need to, I think, pin myself in order to be seen in the video. Sorry. Thanks, everybody. So yeah, Santa Rita Jail is the only jail in Alameda County at this point. It's located out in Dublin, out in East County, and it's a deadly jail. About 67 people have died in this jail since 2014. And just this year, there's been 5 deaths in the jail. And the pictures that you're seeing is a Care First action that just happened a few months ago, where we went out to the jail to hold vigil to honor the lives lost, to honor Stephen Lofton, Elizabeth Laurel, Cody Van Buren, Charles Johnson. And since that action happened, another young person, Eric Magana, who's 26 years old and houseless, has died in the jail. And those tombstones that you see were created by our coalition members that really give you a sense of how many people have died inside. And so, you know, fighting for decarceration and fighting for the things that people need is really part of, you know, respecting their lives and in fighting for a sense of justice. Next slide. And so This slide gives us some data, right? On any given night in Alameda County, there are about 9,000 people who experience homelessness, and this number grows to about 15,000 folks over the course of a year, with about 4,000 people coming off of homelessness, which means that homelessness is rising faster than the county and our social systems are able to provide solutions. And about half of the folks who are unsheltered, this is based on data that the county has gathered, so it is incomplete, but we know that about half folks have a mental health condition or a history of criminalization. And for folks who are formerly incarcerated, we know that it is harder for us to get access into public resources. It's harder to get a job. It's harder to get housing. It's next to impossible to live with your loved ones if they live in affordable housing. And so we're trying to really break down these barriers and look at this issue as an intersectional issue. Next slide.
So I'm going to take this up as kind of a parenthesis. My name is John Lindsay Poland, and I work for the American Friends Service Committee, active member of the Care First Coalition. And so Tash said there's one jail in Alameda County, but that was a few years ago. There were 2 jails, and the jail population was much bigger. It was more than twice as much as it is now, considerably more than twice as much in 2008, mostly as a result of state reforms around drug offenses and other types of things that had been heavily criminalized. The jail population has gone down. And yet, during that same period, that blue line is showing the sheriff's office overall budget in Alameda County. So more than twice as much as it was 15 years ago. So this is also part of the problem, that in addition to people not getting their needs met and being criminalized, that the resources are increasingly going into the jail, even as the jail population has gone down. We can go to the next slide.
Thanks, John. So you all may have heard us. We've been sending out action alerts to this, but Alameda County has silently been moving forward to approve an $80 million jail expansion, as it is the 5th, even though it's the 5th largest jail in the country, the 3rd largest jail in the state. The sheriff and the board of supervisors have approved to build a 38,000 square foot new building for 107 new jail staff. This was actually a plan originally started in 2015, where the state had created billions of dollars of grants year after year to fund jail expansions. At first, they were just trying to make jails bigger. Then the state was we were calling for programs in the community, and the state said, well, we'll create more programs in the jails. We said, we want care, not cages. And then so they created grants to fund mental health care inside of cages. And so when I was a young organizer at the Ella Baker Center, this was actually something that I worked on back in 2015, was fighting against this jail expansion that ultimately got approved. But the jail expansion included housing, even though we were against it. And it was a much smaller, it was $20 million cheaper. And so now that it has reemerged with this new design, we are going to continue to fight it. In fact, Senator Skinner got word of this jail expansion moving forward again and is trying to stall it. And so it's all hands on deck right now to call our supervisors to get them to reconsider, because we know that people cannot get well in a cell, and the amount of money that the county is putting towards this jail expansion could go towards things that we know everyone really needs, like housing, housing subsidies, care in the community. Additionally, the county has failed to tell us how much this jail expansion is going to cost annually. So, the cost of running this thing is going to, over time, be way more than the cost of the $80 million jail expansion. And of course, that should go towards 107 new staff in the community, not in the jail. Next slide. So as we're, as all of these issues come to head in Alameda County, it's really important for us as organizers and for us in the coalition to have some criteria to assess, are these solutions that the sheriff is bringing forward, or that the supervisors are bringing forward, or even our behavioral health care providers are bringing forward, are these actually going to provide care for people? And so these are some of the 5 criteria that we use to really assess if a solution is a real solution, right? So number 1, is the solution bringing any relief to the people who are facing this violence, right? So for example, housing solutions that exclude people who have a record are not bringing relief. In fact, they're fracturing our communities. Is the relief only reaching people who are the least marginalized? We know the criminal justice system is rooted in racism and classism. And so when you have these diversion courts, like a behavioral health court, and we see that the eligibility criteria is, 13 items long and only prioritizes lower offenses, we know that it is not serving folks who are Black and brown, because folks who are Black and brown get charged with more serious and violent offenses for the same crimes than our white counterparts. So ensuring that anything that happens is very inclusive, right? Is it only changing the window dressing or actually legitimizing the harmful system, right? So there's multiple lawsuits that the county is facing where these seemingly liberal or progressive lawyers are trying to make care possible in the jail, and what that's in response to all of the deaths that are happening. And what that has resulted in is millions, hundreds of millions of dollars funneled into the jail without any metrics or goals towards decarcerating people, decarcerating people out of the jail. 4, is it net widening the systems? Is it expanding the reach, right? And so when you pour $80 million into a jail expansion for mental health care, what does that mean for folks who are seeking mental health care in the community and can't find it, right? Every dollar that goes to the jail is a dollar robbed from the community. And lastly, is it pitting people against each other? We see that people with serious mental health disorders sit in jail the longest, often have repeated hospitalization and incarceration. And we also often see that the care that folks needed when they were first experiencing crisis is actually only available when that person has experienced incarceration, and sometimes more than twice, right? And so that is how the county is figuring out how to prioritize care, is at the point of crisis and not at a point of prevention. Next slide. So this slide just summarizes kind of, if you want to know anything about what's messed up in Alameda County, know that our county budget is not prioritizing community care. Even though the jail population is half the amount it used to be 10 years ago, it's more than $500 million. And that money isn't the problem. Our county is somehow finding the funds to fund a jail expansion. And so what we need to do is we need to organize to create the political will to force them to reject this and to force them to do the right thing. So I'll stop there. I know this was a lot, and I know that there may be people who are directly impacted by these issues in the room. And so we just wanted to just have folks place in the chat, how does hearing about these problems and hearing about the context of what people are facing, how is this impacting you? How are you feeling right now? Folks are welcome to also just unmute yourself. Pissed, pensive. Yes, betrayal, heartbroken, angry, the need to persevere. Thank you. Well, we're gonna appreciate you all for being here on a Saturday and learning about this. It's not easy stuff, and we are now going to move into the next part of our training where we equip you with some of the knowledge around what's going on in the budget, because knowledge is power, and we need that in order to advocate for the things that we need. So I'll pass it to Joy.
Thank you, Tash. So this next session is going to be a budget deep dive to give you a sense of who influences the budget, who participates, and what is it currently looking like. So first and foremost, the most powerful people in the process are us, the taxpayers and residents, because, right, we vote these folks into office, we pay their salaries, we front the department budgets through our taxes. So we also help to determine what the county's priorities are, and we do this through organizing, through building a bigger and stronger and more informed movement that follows the money and fights for solutions. So this is why it's important that we're hosting this budget training so that we can do that more effectively. This slide represents the current Board of Supervisors for Alameda County. These folks are elected with the exception of District 2, Elisa Marquez. She was appointed this year. She applied and was appointed this year after the passing of Richard Valle, but she is up for re-election in the next year. But these folks, their role is to kind of run the executive and legislative functions of the county. They set priorities, they approve the budget, they control county property, they pass local laws, and depending if they are overseeing the unincorporated territories, they also act as the mayor. And so in relationship to the budget process, they receive the pitches from each department on what they need to operate, and they hear from the public on what they want to see, and ultimately they vote once they negotiate it. So you can find your county supervisor at the link down below. And in order to understand the intersection and barriers between care and incarceration at the county level, it's important to know who's in charge of these services. So these are the key agency directors between the sheriff's office. So Yesenia Sanchez was the newly elected sheriff. The justice system, Pamela Price is the newly elected district attorney. And then our healthcare systems, Healthcare Services Agency, HCSA, Colleen Chawla is appointed, and the Behavioral Health Department, ACBH, Dr. Karen Tribble is also appointed, although Colleen Chawla is the boss of Karen Tribble, so they are related in that way. And arguably one of the most important people in the budget process is this woman, Susan Muranishi. She is the Alameda County Administrator and was appointed in 1995, which basically means that she oversees the fiscal integrity of the county. And she also provides analysis and recommendations to the board of fiscal decisions. And she's kind of responsible for the budget process and why it's so inaccessible in the first place. Another way to think about this is she holds the purse string. She tells them what they can and cannot fund. And she's the highest paid county executive in the state. In 2021, she made over, get ready, $853 million, or $853,000, sorry. But just to give you a sense of like this woman who is holding the purse strings is also making a lot of money in order to keep the county fiscally conservative. And this is a map of all of the county's departments and what it is that the budget supports. In green and red, these are the departments that have, or these are the departments that have kind of the most influence in this conversation around services that support the population needing mental health and substance use care. So Healthcare Services Agency, Social Services Agency, Community Development Agency, those are all kind of things that we're allied with or are wanting to increase in funding, and public protection, including probation, sheriff's office, district attorney, and trial courts. We want to see held accountable for their current funding and also see decreases when necessary. And
So I'm going to lead us through a real deep dive into the what of the budget. So fasten your statistical seatbelts, but also if you have any kind of questions or comments, please do put them in the chat because we're going to get into the details. In order to challenge these twisted priorities, we have to understand better how it works, what the numbers are, where the money is going, who's controlling it. And Alameda County really lacks both data and transparency in that respect. So one of the things that we have said over and over, especially in the context of the Care First task force that the county has set up, is that the county is not measuring unmet needs for behavioral health. So the county knows often how many people have gotten services, what their demographics are even, but what are the needs that are not being met? Like, what are the waiting lists? What are the ways in which people are not getting their needs met? And that means they end up being homeless, they end up getting sicker, they end up having needs that are just not met, and then they're criminalized and end up in Santa Rita or passing them out of Santa Rita. So that is something that the county is just not measuring very well. But then there's things that the county knows and doesn't publish or disclose in a very clear way. So one of those is around budget issues and decisions. The county doesn't really reach out to constituents about budget issues or budget decisions that are so key in shifting these priorities. One example of that is there are budget meetings that are often posted the day before, like 24 hours before, with no accompanying documents because they're, quote, special meetings. So they're not in compliance with the State Brown Act for informing and giving enough notice for the community to participate. It doesn't publish the amount of money in its unrestricted county reserves, which is over $1 billion of unrestricted money that the county has. And it also doesn't show, like, of all of the increased money that's going into the jail, it doesn't disclose or lay out how much of that money is unspent, or even how it's being used in the jail. There's lots of money for overtime. There's lots of money that's been allocated that's not being spent, and that is so far been opaque, and we'll come back to that. So it's really important to know that of the county's budget, most of it is actually coming from the state and federal governments. And that's of a $3.9 billion budget. Most of it is coming from the state and the federal government. And that's also important because the services that people need in general are being reimbursed by the state and federal government. Sometimes it's matching money that the county could multiply its impact by putting in its own funds, by putting in county funds, which is not true for the jail. And if we can go to the next slide, of the money that the county controls, so that's just under $1 billion, the bulk of it, nearly half of that, is going to what's called public protection, which includes the sheriff's office, probation, the district attorney, and the public defender's office. And of the money that the county controls, right? So that's discretionary money. less than half of that amount is going into healthcare. Instead, the county is relying on state and federal funds to address healthcare needs, including behavioral healthcare needs. So this is just a breakdown of what it costs per person per year for different types of, if we can go to the next slide. Oops, okay, all right, reordering. So there is a, when we look at budgets for that the county pays for, again, the county has to pay for virtually all of the jail costs. Whereas the behavioral health budget, it has a much smaller portion of that budget that is coming from county funds. And you can see that when this lawsuit settlement, it's called the Babu settlement, began in 2020, the county began to put more money into the jail. It did increase, including during the pandemic, some of the behavioral health county contributions to the behavioral health budget, but the jail budget has just ballooned during that time. And that is mostly a result of the county responding to that litigation by saying, okay, we're going to hire more than 400 new staff in the jail. And that's the actual budget. If we can go to the next slide now. At the same time, even though the county is putting more money into budgeting more money for the jail, the gap between the projected revenues and the projected costs each year, except for the first year of the pandemic, has not grown. So this graph is showing every year each of the county departments say, okay, this is what our revenues are expected to be, this is what our costs are expected to be. And then the county administrator puts it all together and says, okay, here there's a gap that we somehow have to make up. So that blue amount there is that projected gap that every year they figure out some way to make it up. So even though there's more than $100 million in additional costs in the jail since 2020 that are not being made up with additional revenues, somehow this gap has not grown, except again for that extraordinary first year of the pandemic. So in other words, the county is finding money somehow to pay for additional jail costs and not doing that. So when the county says we can't find the money for behavioral health, that's just not correct. The problem is the county has a rule that says if a social service or a health service is going to add a program or add costs, it must find a funding source for it. And it does not have that rule for the jail. That's a fundamental problem. That rule has to go. We can go to the next one. So what is the timeline here? The county departments, they draft their budgets early in the year and submit them to the county administrator. That is done behind closed doors. That's not a public process at all. The first public piece is a budget hearing that happens in April, where each of the departments lay out in general terms what their budget is expected to be in the next fiscal year. The fiscal year starts July 1st. And then this month is the key month. So for decision making, at least. So the county administrator will submit the proposed budget for the coming year sometime between now and the last week of the year. It has to do so by June 23rd or June 22nd to comply with the Brown Act. And then that last week of this month, there will be the budget hearings. At that point, we expect there to be a board letter on transparency that will come from Supervisors Halbert and Tam that we helped to draft, and that could make the budget process more transparent. But the budget amounts we don't know yet until the county administrator submits its proposed budget. And go to the next one. So, Joy?
Yeah, thanks, John. So to take away from this section, a reaffirmation that the county's budget currently and historically does not prioritize our community's most urgent needs. Those are housing, healthcare, life-informing resources for our most marginalized community members, and instead has allocated over 2.5 times more overall funding on public protections in jail rather than on behavioral health services. So what the county is saying is that they're more prepared to incarcerate you than to care for you, which is unacceptable. This budget process is led by the county administrator, and it's largely inaccessible to county residents, which means our tax dollars are being spent without our consent and our approval. And so we demand for a county budget that funds our community's care, healing, and stability, and a process that is on time for the people and by the people. And Tash is going to share a little bit more about what we've won and how we do that.
I think actually John is going to do that.
Yes. Go to the next slide. So, this might seem very, very overwhelming to you and maybe even depressing, but it's really important to know that the activism in this county has achieved some wins. First of all, with the adoption of the Care First policy 2 years ago, which took a lot of organizing work, and it is now county policy that decarceration, particularly of people with behavioral health needs, must be prioritized by the county. And it must reduce the number of people in the jail with behavioral health needs. And that's a reflection, and also on the heels of that, as a consequence, has been that these issues are the most debated issues when it comes to the county. People who have been our adversaries on some issues are now also taking this up within the Board of Supervisors. It is a discussed issue. That led last year to a commitment to at least identify funding sources for $50 million for what's called the forensic plan, which we'll talk about in a minute. And it also included a commitment not just to identify the funding, but the funding has been committed for purchasing back 27 subacute beds at Villa Fairmont that are currently leased out to other counties and to Kaiser. And there is a commitment to at least identify the funds for additional full service partnerships, which are wraparound services. We can go to the next thing. So I mentioned a board letter, which is basically a resolution by the Board of Supervisors that will be introduced sometime this month, in the next couple of weeks, by Supervisors Halbert and Tam. And it will require better posting of budget agendas and materials, including to supervisor staff who are also left in the dark on these things. It will require annual reporting on the unrestricted reserves that the county has. So that's money available, particularly for capital costs, construction. It will require a report by the end of October on jail spending, on how things have been spent, but also how funds that were allocated have not been spent, including the sources of those funds. And it will require, some of you may be familiar with the state realignment law called AB 109, which reallocates some state funds back to the county, but not all of those funds are really transparent in terms of how they're being spent, particularly by the sheriff. So it will require some reporting on that. We're also calling for a small amount within the county, the scale of the county's budget, to be invested in that identification of the gaps in services, the unmet needs, and also better assessment of the staff shortages, which we'll talk about in a minute too. But because the county, like other entities and jurisdictions, faces a severe shortage of staff who provide the services for behavioral health and housing, and needs to really address the causes of that. Go to the next one. Yeah.
So the Care First Jails Last Coalition has identified several investments to strategically expand care in the community, including 80 million to build additional supportive housing units, 43 million to fully fund the behavioral health department's forensic plan, 25.5 million for full service partnerships, wraparound services for people with severe mental illness, 7.7 million for an additional voluntary residential crisis center, similar to what we have in Oakland, Amber House, 6 million to increase pay of behavioral health community-based organization line staff, and 2 million to make existing county mobile crisis teams run 24/7. So that's the CAT team and the MET team over at Alameda County Behavioral Health. Further, the coalition has proposed identifying 17 million to maintain the current level of care. As John was mentioning, we're currently in a behavioral health workforce crisis. It is really the number of vacant clinician positions across the county is just astronomical, and we've identified that 17 million a year would help retain the staff that are currently hired to do the critical care work in our communities, and would cover that 17 million would cover a 15% increase in current behavioral health care worker salaries at our community-based organizations. So we really need to invest in the community-based behavioral health workforce. And then also 25.5 million to double the number of people served by full service partnerships. So FSPs are really intensive services designed for people with severe mental illness, kind of with a whatever it takes philosophy to help people on their path to recovery. So currently Alameda County has about 1,000 FSP slots, but the U.S. Department of Justice cited a need for more than quadruple that number, so 4,000 to 6,000 slots. So we are including in our demands an investment in more FSPs in our community. And then 43 million to fully fund Alameda County's behavioral health department's countywide forensic plan. John mentioned earlier that there's been 50 million committed, but the additional 43 million would support or could support 6.6 million for 6 mobile crisis teams, 2.2 million for crisis 24-hour dispatch service, 16.5 million to expand voluntary residential treatment beds, 2.2 for boarding care facilities, 1.5 million for a facility for co-occurring mental illness and substance treatment, 9.5 million for hospital beds, and 2 million to expand the satellite urgent care clinics, 1.8 million for reentry support teams, and 1 million for peer respite for persons from Santa Rita Jail on probation at risk.
Thank you so much, Mia. It's so important that we have folks like Mia, who works with the 13 federally qualified health clinics in the county, who works with behavioral health workers and clinicians and sees how violent and disruptive policing and criminalization is to our communities. And so we're just really grateful to have service providers who understand this intersection and who can support us in informing us around, what are the unmet needs in the county, even though the county is like shit at gathering data, right? Like we know what people need. And so if you are a behavioral health worker or a clinician or do reentry work, we definitely want to connect with you. But in terms of our budget, we know that it's not enough to just say we don't want this jail expansion, right? We have to actually paint a picture with what we need. And that takes, even though the budget process is kind of dry, all of these numbers seem really dry. A lot of this work takes creativity and imagination, and some like robust frameworks like the Housing First framework, which is really a framework that views housing as a foundation for stability without prerequisites or conditions that people have to do in order to get it, right? So we know that if you are, if you have a mental health need, for a lot of the services, like at the pipeline at the top, right? If you are homeless, a lot of housing providers force you to go through this really intense process where you get all your medication, you get all your behavioral health and mental health care while you're in some sort of housing shelter or transitional housing. Hopefully there wouldn't be any gaps in your housing, and then you can get a job, and then eventually you'll be able to land permanent supportive housing. But we know that having a roof over your head is the most stable thing, that having a home is the most stable thing to be able to get your other needs met, right? And right now, the jail is the de facto place that is, quote unquote, sheltering people who are having trouble getting their needs met. And so that's why, if you go to the next slide, our budget platform calls for an investment of $80 million. So that is to build the brick and mortar of permanent supportive housing programs and services in Alameda County. And we know that this is a really big number, and that's why we're leading with that number and not going with the low-hanging fruit, because housing is a human right. And if we make these big investments up front, it actually ends up being so much more cost effective and reduces a lot of harm, right? So this chart tells us that having access to permanent supportive housing reduces hospitalization time by 23%, emergency room visits by 30%, and days in nursing homes by 42%. And it also keeps families together. If you have children with mental health needs, then if you have mental health needs and you have children, having access to permanent supportive housing is an ability to get your care met without actually having your children taken away from you. And so that is why we really are leading with this. Next slide. So we're doing this training because we want you to get involved with us. We are already the loudest voice in the room at the county level when it comes to the budget, and yet the county still is not investing in enough money in the things that we need. And so these are some things that you can do with us. If you're a writer or a journalist, or we would love for you to work with us to influence media, help us write op-eds, help us write letters to the editor. If you've got social media skills and love making memes, we would love that too. We have a toolkit that we're going to share with you in a bit that has a call script and an email script to call your supervisor. If you are retired or have a flexible work schedule, we would love for you to join us in making your voice heard. We have a signal thread that you can join where we'll even let you know when it's time to make public comment. If you are part of a union or a neighborhood group or a faith community, we would love for you to endorse our budget platform and encourage your members to do these things as well, and maybe even join our coalition if you have capacity to. If you have relationships with people in the county and can help us gather data or get insight, we definitely need you. And if you're just all around pissed like all of us and want to take action, we need you too. And so this picture on the right is a picture of actually a projection that we did on the Alameda County Board of Supervisors building during the pandemic in 2021, where the county was going to spend decided to spend $100 million to add new jail staff instead of adding new behavioral health staff in the community. Next slide. And like I said, we are in the belly of the beast. So much of what we're doing is about telling the truth. And that is what it takes to heal together. And naming that we do not have a justice system. We have a punishment bureaucracy. And our work is about transforming the way in which we approach societal issues. And so with all of the deaths that are going on in the jail, and with the jail expansion that is happening, and with the solutions that we're bringing forward, and with the continued negligence from the Board of Supervisors, we are rallying in 3 more days to give them a wake-up call. We are going to go to their doorstep on Tuesday at 9 a.m. to demand that they reconsider the jail expansion and fund the things that we need. And here are some links that you can access to endorse our platform. If you can't make it, we would love for you to feel the heat by emailing the county supervisors. Our toolkit has a whole template and all of their emails. If you also have time at the end of June, we would love to mobilize with you to attend the budget hearings. And so, yeah, we hope that this budget training lit a fire underneath your feet and equipped you with the knowledge that you need to organize with us. And that concludes our training for now. And we just really want to open it up for questions and then just express our gratitude to you for coming today.
Thanks, everyone. Yeah, maybe we can end the screen slide here. I know Kari has been collecting some questions in the chat, so maybe we can pass to you to start fielding some of those. But also, if folks have questions that haven't made it into the chat yet, you're more than welcome to come off of mute and share those with us.
Hey everybody, thanks so much Joy, Tash, John, Mia for presenting. So dense and so important to learn about, and also just a lot to take in. So appreciate y'all breaking it down. The first question that we got was answered, but the second question was just trying to understand a little bit about how the county budget and the city budgets interact. And how we come together with the cities to fund these vital resources or don't come together with them. I know it's a little bit outside of the purview of this training, but I know y'all are also experts in some of these areas. So if anyone wants to speak to that, that would be helpful.
So it's a complex question, but there are some things where the county has more responsibility or the city has more responsibility. So for example, cities have responsibility for, say, recreation programs. They have responsibility for some housing. The county also has responsibility for funding some housing. Definitely has more responsibility for health and behavioral health programs and services. The exception is Berkeley. Berkeley has its own health and behavioral health department that operates on its own. So I think there's not a lot of coordination. There should be more coordination. Yeah, and then there's the unincorporated areas where the sheriff, for example, has more responsibility, whereas in the cities, the city police departments, have responsibility and are doing arrests and patrol, versus in the unincorporated areas where the sheriff is in charge of those things. I don't know if anybody wants to add anything.
Yeah, I'll say something in terms of the city versus the county budget. So what's really interesting, in this moment is, going back to the budget is a moral document. So the county is a lot more flush in cash than the city is. The city is experiencing a $360 million deficit in 2 years. So that's like about 175 million a year. Whereas the county deficit is only about somewhere between 27 million to 54 million. So exponentially less. But even though the city is experiencing like a massive deficit, Mayor Sheng Tao has invested in her current budget proposal $200 million towards building affordable housing. She's also trying to figure out how to assess Oakland's public land to build affordable housing on that land. Whereas the county has like these old measures and bonds that they used to do, but is nowhere near making that level, like $200 million level of investments in terms of building housing that the city is. And they're also sitting on top of a lot of county land that they're not using as an opportunity to build on. So I think that question actually brings up a great opportunity for us to actually talk to the city to see if they can add some pressure on the county to say, hey, we're pulling our weight. Where are you, Alameda County, in that? Maybe that's something we can do after this budget process. Myrna?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for that terrific answer. And I wanted to mention, I resonated a lot when in an early slide, we highlighted the fact that that we don't have a gap needs analysis to work from that really tells us or, how close are we getting to fulfilling the need when we get programs funded and so on. And I think I think going along with that is that we don't have an analysis that tells us where are the needs greatest, and that would help to direct funds to where they are the greatest. So I'm concerned very much about the disproportionate needs in Oakland, and making sure that funding is appropriately allocated in support of Oakland. Thank you so much for that answer.
There's a question from David about the proportionate, the costs for someone in Santa Rita versus supportive housing. If we can go to a slide, Mia, if you could share a slide we inadvertently skipped over, which actually addresses that very issue. So this is what we've calculated in terms of the cost per person per year, so the annualized cost. So permanent supportive housing, that's housing that includes services with it. It's part of the county's Home Together plan, but has not been sufficiently funded. And those costs are about $30,000 per year per person. Similarly, full service partnerships, those are the wraparound services for people with behavioral health needs. Those are about $30,000 per year. And as Mia said, are woefully underfunded compared to the need, as identified by the U.S. Department of Justice. Much more is subacute care. So that's a locked bed facility like Villa Fairmont for someone who has a serious mental health need. And that's, on the order of $170,000 a year. But Santa Rita Jail, with the increased amounts that have been put into it, not including the construction costs, not including that, is well over $200,000 a year. So by far, way more expensive than any other investment. So even if you were like not looking at the harm, not looking at the racism, not looking at the prevention, like it's a completely perverse fiscal investment on the part of the county.
Thanks so much, John. Yeah, that feels really powerful and feels like something we as a community just need to keep hammering in. just wanted to highlight Brian's question about the city of Dublin. So the city of Dublin contracts with the sheriff for police services. Does this have anything to do with the Santa Rita jail being in Dublin, or is it just coincidental? Do we know the answer to that?
I would say it's probably more political than legislative. There are other, AC Transit also contracts with the sheriff. It used to be that Peralta Community Colleges contracted with the sheriff. And I think there might be some other minor things that contract with the sheriff. So Dublin does that, but I suspect it's more, that's more of a political relationship, because there's a lot of people who work in Dublin and live in Dublin who are part of the sheriff's office. And Dublin is a much more conservative community than most of the county. And it's also a smaller municipality within the county than most of them.
There's a question: if someone is apprehended by municipal police, are they taken directly to Santa Rita jail or detained elsewhere? Yeah, a lot of people, when you're arrested, I mean, what's just kind of wild is just even thinking about how the back of a cop car is a cage. So you are originally put in it. The first cage that you're in is in that cop car. Sometimes there is a holding cell at the police department that people may end up in. But oftentimes people are taken directly to Santa Rita, where they are then booked, getting like a mental health and a supposed mental health and medical health assessment, and then arraigned in court within 3 days if they are charged with something. And what we're seeing with a lot of the deaths that are happening in the jail is that they're happening in the early days during the booking period, and that a lot of people are dying by suicide and by overdoses inside of the jail. So although there are assessments that are happening when folks are coming in, there is no care. And the county is, I know I'm going on a tangent, but the county says there's no care because staffing is an issue. But in a lot of the deaths where we are able to see the footage, there are actually dozens of deputies sometimes surrounding that person or checking in on that person hour by hour, but not providing care. So the number of staff is actually not an issue. Okay. Average length of stay at Santa Rita jail. John, I don't know if you know that. I know that when I was doing research on this, people, when we were looking at like the average, like that people were released at around like 20 to 30 days, often because charges would be dismissed. So, which means that there wasn't enough evidence for the DA to come up with a charge. But I know that is the most common reason for release, but I don't know if that's what the average length of stay is. Do you know, John?
So most people, there's about 25,000 people who go to Santa Rita every year. Most of them are released within 2 to 3 days. So that changes the average. For people who are not released within 2 or 3 days, yeah, I'm not sure what that average is. I think when you put it all together, it's about 9 days on average. But that's like, it's kind of two different populations almost, right? People who they might not be charged, or they might be released on their own recognizance, or they might be charged and there's bail set, and they can't afford the bail, and then they stay longer. And that average is considerably longer.
Bean?
The average length of stay, according to a recent analysis in 2021, was 32 days. But as John points out, well over half of those people are in the jail for less than 2 days. So it's only about, see if I can get this right. I'm sorry, I keep losing my numbers. It's only like maybe 2,000 people who are in the jail for more than 30 days. Out of the 25,000 people that go into the jail. So there's whole different segments of the population that get treated differently and are there for a different length of time. And then, as we know, there are over 300 people who are in the jail that we are housing on behalf of the federal government. And those guys have a longer length of stay as well.
Yes, okay, thank you. I really do want to respect people's time. As it is already 12:30. If you are a member in this coalition, we will be sure we'll get some of those questions answered. If you are interested in joining the coalition or want to be more involved, please reach out to Joy, our incredible organizer, who has just done so much in her 4 months here with us to bring the energy that we need to fight this fight. And so before I let you all go, I just want to see by a show of hands, who in this room can or will we see at the action on Tuesday, or can call your supervisor on Tuesday? Let's throw up some thumbs up emojis. Yes. Thank you. Yes. Who in this room can share on Instagram the action on Tuesday or email your friends about it? Amazing. And then who in this room can roll with us to the through this month into the budget fight to demand care, not cages? Oh my gosh, I love this. Sustained commitment. Let's go. So I'll just pass it off to Joy to close us off.
Thanks, Tash. And honestly, thanks to all of you. This is really great to be in conversation with you all. And I feel like I know a little bit more about each of you in this fight. I can't wait to see you all on Tuesday for those of you that are coming to the action. But for those of you who I will see another time, I hope that you all take good care. I hope that you all get some good rest this weekend, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.